The deep web is one of the most amazing things on earth, not because of how joyful it makes people or anything, but because it is a completely uncensored view of people. You can speak your mind, buy what you want, do anything you want. When on the deep web, you have complete and total freedom. I had always been fascinated by the deep web, and at the time the events in this story occurred, I was in college. Lots of people at my campus had really been getting into accessing the deep web. It was almost like a trend. With so many people getting on it, it seemed perfectly safe for me to give it a try. Now I had always heard of the deep web horror stories, stories of hacking, stumbling on disgusting sites, and people even somehow finding your address. These stories were mainly what kept me off the deep web, but with most of the people at my college using it on a normal basis, I decided to give it a go. I asked a friend to come over and help me set it up. When my friend arrived, we opened up my laptop and began to set everything up. He told me that we were using Tor, a program that lets you access the deep web. He also asked me if I was planning on doing anything illegal, to which I replied no. He said that since I wasn't, we didn't need to install Tails, which is apparently a software that makes it more secure if you plan on doing illegal things. A little while later, everything was set up. I had my new IP address, and my friend gave me a brief rundown of what to do and what not to do. He made it very clear that when I was using the hidden wiki, that I kept it on censored mode, so that it would be less likely for me to see something I didn't want to see. After about 2 weeks of using the deep web, I felt like a pro. I had accessed many different sites, spoken with some great people, made friends, even bought some weed. I had become cocky and was ready to dig deeper into the dark web. I turned off the censored mode on the hidden wiki and began to browse the links. It took a while, mostly because Tor is a bit slow and many of the links just led to dead web pages. Eventually, I stumbled onto a site called All the Gore. It was mainly a big chat room with many different topics. I had a fairly strong stomach. I had seen many violent movies and had seen beheadings, killings, etc. through the normal internet. After looking at a few different chat rooms, I noticed how sick this site really was. The people in these chat rooms were actually killers, bragging about some of the things they had done. In the chat room, you could also post pictures. One man by the name of Culture045 had the stage in one of the chat rooms. He was explaining in detail how he had broke into someone's house, kidnapped a little girl, and brutally killed her parents by hiding under their bed and then opening their throats. He then explained how he brought the little girl back to his house, raped her, beat her, and cut her up. I didn't think he was telling the truth at first, but then he posted pictures. These were the most horrifying pictures I had ever seen. Close-ups of the poor 8 to 10-year-old girl being brutally raped, beaten, and cut with a knife. Culture kept posting pictures. The new ones were of the girl, tied to a chair, bleeding, crying, throwing up, etc. Then, he showed a picture of him with a drill, drilling into her skull. The most haunting part is that while he was doing it, he was looking at the camera with sheer joy on his face. I had seen enough and typed in the chat room window, "You people are sick and deserve to die. How can you sleep at night?" Immediately people began making fun of me, saying that I was just as helpless and ignorant as the little girl in the pictures, and that I should get off the big boy part of the internet. They began saying I was a pussy and calling me an empath. When Culture typed something in the chat box, he said, "Really? Where do you live, buddy? I'm sure everybody would love to see you on this site." I then make the biggest mistake of my life and typed, "I'm calling the police and having this site shut down." Less than a minute later, everything on the site went black and a new chat box appeared in green. In it, someone named Admin1 typed in the box. He said, "Call the cops and you will regret it." I didn't type anything in the box and reached for my cell phone. What happened next haunts me to this day. My phone said I had a new message. I opened it, and it said, "Call the police, and you're dead." There was no number. It didn't even say unknown number, it was just blank. I looked back at my laptop and saw my webcam light turn on. I quickly covered it, but I saw on the screen a picture of me looking at my phone. I got wide-eyed and froze for a moment when the admin typed again, "Put the phone down right now and uncover your webcam." I put my phone down, but kept the webcam covered. When he typed again, "Okay then, be like that." Right after, he posted my full name, age, and address in the chat box and typed, It would be a shame if you and your college buddies went missing, wouldn't it? He said. I then did as he said and uncovered my webcam. He then told me to follow his instructions on how to make it impossible for me to reach the site again. I followed each and every one. When I finished, I got a text that said, "Now don't ever try and come back." Just like before, it had no number. I still called the police from my friend's phone, but they were never able to find the site. If you ever go on the deep web, don't ever just mindlessly explore, especially if you don't have additional software to keep you more secure. I was a stupid college kid, and I just hope nobody makes the same mistakes I did. I moved to a different home and changed all of my information, but I still get nightmares to this day. I was extremely rattled by what had happened. The police tried to track down the website, but since there was no way for them to recover my history, and I had originally found the sick site by just randomly clicking links, it seemed pretty hopeless to find it. The police told me to change all my information about myself and to move in with a friend. After changing pretty much all of my information, I decided to move in with my friend David. David was an extremely honest, hardworking person. He never went to parties, slacked off, got drunk/high. He was very dedicated to finishing college. In fact, he was one of the few kids I knew at the time who wasn't getting on the deep web regularly. I had told him all about my experience with the deep web, and that's mostly why he agreed to let me stay with him. One night, we were both up studying very late when my phone went off. I looked to see who had texted me and saw that the person sending the message had no number, just like last time. It read, "Check your computer." There was nothing else to it, just one simple instruction. I opened my laptop, and when I did, I noticed that I didn't have control of the mouse. I tried to move it, but the mouse had just moved on its own. Someone had remote access to my computer somehow. I never gave anyone remote access before. I tried a whole bunch of keyboard commands, but not a single one worked. I noticed that whoever had control of my laptop was downloading a software, most likely malware, but there was nothing I could do. I heard my phone go off again, and this time, the message said, "Look out your window." I was sitting right by a window. I didn't know which window the guy was referring to, so I looked out the one I was sitting by and saw a man in the parking lot leaning up against a white van. He had a phone in his hand, and when I looked at him, he nodded. My phone went off again. Type in and hold down Shift, Alt, F5 at the same time to activate the software. I called in David to my room to show him what was going on. He seemed just as nervous as I was, but with the man just outside our window, we didn't want to anger him. David called the police right away and told me that they would be there soon. I didn't activate the software and just sat there. Eventually I got another text. "I am coming in if you don't do it right now." I didn't know why he or the person in control of my computer couldn't do it, but I didn't dare to ask. At the same time though, I was 99% sure this program had malware or spyware or something that would be very harmful to my computer, so I refused to activate it. David grabbed a baseball bat, just in case the man outside tried to come in. About 5 minutes later, we heard the door knob turning. It was locked, but we then heard banging at the door. We both freaked out, and I looked out the window again. Sure enough, the man and the van were gone. The banging on the door got more and more violent, until eventually, we heard a horrible scratching sound. It lasted a few more minutes, and then we heard footsteps walk down the hall and eventually fade away. I received another text. "We will be back." That really got to me. When the cops arrived, they told me to look at my door. I followed them back out into the hallway and saw engraved in our door my name. The police began investigating the whole building, and they had a tech police officer come in and look at my computer. He began to do scans and investigate the weird software on my laptop. Eventually, he managed to close and remove it and told me that my laptop isn't safe. He said the core files of it have been hacked into /corrupted. We did a complete wipe of my laptop, and he looked at my phone as well. Just like last time, he couldn't tell where the messages came from and told me that they would be sure to keep some cops nearby in case this ever happened again. The next day, I had just got home from school and was really tired. David wasn't home yet, so I went into my room and fell into the bed. I had just begun to close my eyes when I heard a rattling sound in my closet. I lifted my head up and didn't hear it again, so I went back to sleep. After a few minutes, the closet door swung open. I leaped out of bed and saw a man with a mask walking over to me. I ran for the door and slammed it behind me. I ran out to the parking lot started my car, and drove away as fast as I could. By the time the police arrived, the man was of course gone. The apartment surprisingly had not been wrecked or anything. We didn't even find anything stolen. He didn't seem to do anything at first. This night, 2 police officers were monitoring everyone who came in / out of the building in order to catch the man. I opened my laptop and noticed that my wallpaper had changed. It was just a bunch of trees, but it had been changed to a sickening photo of a man with a mask, the same mask that I saw on the man who was in my closet, digging a knife into a baby's eye in what looked like a small cabin. I also noticed that all my applications and programs were gone, and I saw the same software as last time. Right in the middle, I clicked on it, and it had already been installed. Just like last time, it filled the entire screen, and what looked like a live stream was going on. I couldn't exit out, and the live stream was coming from a boy's house. He looked about 13 or 14 and was at his computer. It didn't take long for me to see that I was watching through his webcam, and he had no idea. I saw a small chat box pop up in the top right of the screen, and in it, someone typed in the box, "Welcome to our live stream. We are glad everyone could be here. Thank you, John, for being here as well." My eyes got very wide. My name was John, and they were waiting until I was watching to start the live stream. As I watched, I saw that the closet door behind the poor boy slowly opened, and a man walked out with a toolbox in one hand. He quietly set the toolbox down and pulled out some duct tape. He went behind the kid and put the tape over his mouth and grabbed him tight. The poor kid's face was of total fear. He tried to scream, but he couldn't because of the tape. They were making a decent amount of noise, so it told me that the kid must have been home alone. I tried hard to exit out, but I couldn't. I then saw the man take out a screwdriver and drive it into the kid's chest. Blood began to pour out, and the kid made an awful wheezing type noise. I saw tears come from his eyes as this sick man began to drive the screwdriver deeper and deeper, and then yank it out. The man then took out a hammer and smashed the kid's hands several times till they were nothing more than a mangled, bloody mess. I tried every command I could to exit out, but nothing was working. I noticed that in the chat box, several people were cheering the man on and requesting for him to do different things to the boy. The man then took out a handheld electric saw, pressed it against the boy's face, and turn it on. The boy screamed with pain as the saw went up into his eye, causing blood to go everywhere and get on the camera a little as well. I started to get tears in my eyes as I couldn't stop it. Then, the man took the screwdriver, gouged out the kid's eyes, and took out a large knife. He proceeded to slit the boy's throat and tossed him on the ground. I was sick. I threw up all over the floor, and when I looked back, I saw in the chat box people typing in horrible things like "fap fap fap" or "Oh my God, that was so wonderful. Thanks so much for doing this, ECT." In the box, I saw someone named Culture045 type into the box, "Thanks for watching, John, winky face." After that, the program closed on its own, and I was left with the sickening wallpaper. I was sweating, breathing heavy, and feeling sick. Throughout the entire thing, I didn't realize that my phone had gone off several times. I looked at it, and the most hateful, mean messages were coming from my friends and family. I asked my mom what was wrong, and she texted back, "You sent that sick, disturbing live stream to everyone. I can't believe who you are. The police have been called." I felt even more sick than before. Those monsters had sent that live stream to all my friends somehow and made it come for me. They had pretty much ruined my life within a couple minuets. When the police arrived, I told them everything that had happened, and quickly they managed to explain to all my friends and family what had happened. They really cracked down on finding these people, and a month later, 4 men had been arrested. One was Culture045, the other was Admin1, and the 2 others were working with them. The site was found and shut down as well, and I got a new laptop and phone. I could say some horror cliche here and say something like I kept getting texts or kept hearing weird things ever since, but none of that happened. They were arrested, and I never heard anything further. It's good to know that those men are in jail or perhaps even dead, but what scares me is all the other people watching the live stream, who were there for pleasure, are still out there, and that there is probably thousands of other Culture045s out there all over the world. Sirens went off in my neighborhood at 2 a.m. Now my neighbors and family are acting strange. Hello, I'd like to start off by saying I'm writing this while hiding in a forest. I'm going to write about everything that happened a couple of days ago. I have no idea how this is happening. I don't know what's going on with all these siren posts. Stay safe, everyone. Part 2 is coming soon. I just need time to write down everything that has happened. My phone will die soon, so when, or if I make it out of here, I will write more soon. I would ask you to call the cops, but I'm 100% sure they would be useless. I don't even know where I am. Where the hell do I even begin? I'll just tell you guys what happened the night of June 18th, 2:47 a.m. I was watching a scary movie in bed at that time, and a jump scare happened. It scared the hell out of me, but a second later the TV started glitching and an alert went off. I thought it was an Amber Alert at first. But it wasn't. The screen was a really dark red, almost like blood. It has white lettering that said shit like, "Go outside, don't be afraid," then it would switch to reverse, "Get the final piece," and my personal favorite, "Open you doors, let us all come in. We're healing." I swear I heard sobbing behind the sounds of warped sirens. The TV went blank. I realized I was frozen and couldn't move, no matter how hard I tried. I glanced back at the TV only to see my name, in bold letters, taking up all of the TV. Alright, this has to be some fucking prank my brother did. He knows how to connect his phone to my TV with Bluetooth, it has to be that. Chris, this isn't fucking funny. Stop messing with me, I'm trying to watch a movie. I yelled. No answer. I tried to squirm around and leave my bed, but I wouldn't budge, like I was being controlled. I started to panic, but then I heard my name. The TV said my fucking name. It didn't sound like my brother or mom or dad. It sounded like nothing I've ever heard before. If an animal could speak and wail with a high-pitched scream at the same time, it would be that. I had enough. I quietly said, "Who are you?" The TV replied in a weird layered voice, sounding breathless now, "Harper, my name, if you need to know. How did it know me?" Did it know me? I stopped asking myself questions when the alert buzzing got louder and louder until it sounded like a dog whistle, but I was being affected by it. I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't. Just when I thought my ears were going to explode from the unbearable pitch, the unknown force paralyzing me was finally released. I quickly turned off the TV and went to go look out my window. I just had this urge to go look, like a trance. It was pitch black. I couldn't see anything, like a starless space. The street lights are usually on at this time, I thought to myself. I stared outside for a while, looking for any source of light. None. I couldn't even see the moon. I jumped back when sirens came screaming through the neighborhood, waking my family up. I'm sure it woke the whole damn neighborhood up as well. I couldn't see any police cars or ambulances nearby, I didn't see any light. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere. Outside. My house. Me. It was in my mind. It didn't sound normal either. You know those videos on YouTube that make the audio all creepy and deep and glitchy? Distorted and all that? That's what it sounded like. Much more surreal though, that haunting sound will probably never leave my brain for as long I live. I heard screeching in the distance that didn't sound human either, like the alert on the TV. It was as loud as the sirens, but I only heard it for 2 seconds. It reminded me of those Skinwalker stories, all the screeching stuff. Maybe it was the tornado warning practice. No, those only happen on Wednesdays, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, please, Redditors. As the sirens went off, the lamp lights were back on again and the sky was cleared. The moon shone again and I could see the stars, it was no longer pitch black. The cloud of darkness was finally gone. The dead silence was eerie. No crickets or crunching of branches, and my street is right in the middle of a forest. It was like everything was dead. As the darkness cleared, I realized every house's door was opened. I winced my eyes back at my faint view front door, flinching when I saw it open. I raced downstairs, turning all the lights on and slammed it shut. I locked it, and made sure every single window and door were too. But, how did it get open? I was going back upstairs when I saw my dad on the floor, with his arms and legs strewn on the floor like he was making a snow angel. Dad! I ran over to him, and pulled at his arm. How did dash, he muttered as I tried to get him off the floor. Did you open the door, Dad? I don't even remember getting on the floor. What is that noise? It's going around the neighborhood. Everyone's door is open too. Look, Dash. I stopped in my tracks while pointing to the window near the front door, as everyone was staring blankly at my house, me, if anything, just standing there. My body went cold and the hairs on my neck stood up. What's wrong, Dash? My dad did the same. What the hell? My dad left to get my mom and brother. I've never seen anything like this before, only in movies. On the comedic side, it sorta looked like a low budget, us thinking about it. My dad called the cops, no answer. I tried every phone in the house, no answer. After a while the siren stopped, but I could still faintly hear the same distorted deep sound ringing in my ears. Damn it, I yelped, slamming the useless smartphone on the table. I felt so helpless and frustrated, I just wanted to go to bed. My family covered up all the windows. We all slept on the couch together, my dad having his shotgun by his side. The next morning, everyone was gone. I looked around in a hurry, only to see them in the kitchen, having breakfast, happily as can be. I asked them all, is everything okay? My only response was from my mom, who replied with, do you want pancakes, sweetie? Or maybe some eggs, you need some protein. Oh, whatever, it's summer, you can have both, you look so out of it. Sit down, she said in a cheerful yet empty, blank and emotionless tone. It didn't even sound like her. Her hair was done all nicely, she had makeup on with bright cherry red lipstick, and she was in a pink dress. My mom hates pink. I stood there in shock, thinking my mother has never spoke to me like that before. She usually greets me for a second and puts down cereal. It didn't take me long to realize my entire family was dressed like a preppy rich family, at a country club or some shit. Even my brother, a boy of no respect for suits and ties, or fancy clothing in general, was dressed in a light plaid button shirt. He would never wear this. I turned to my dad, in a polo shirt. A polo shirt. And shakily asked, is everything all right? I have no idea what you mean. He stated in a stern tone. I'm fine. Your mother's fine. Your brother's fine, hopefully you are too. Now sit down, please. I sat down, more confused as ever, and ate. I looked down and was astonished at the fact I switched from a hoodie and sweatpants to a pastel blue corduroy skirt and a tucked-in white, loose off-the-shoulder blouse. I know for a fact I do not own these clothes, I figured they were my mom's. A million more thoughts rushed through my head. There was no explaining this. I swore I was in my comfy clothes just a second ago. How could I brush this off? I wanted to ask more questions, but I was too afraid, for some reason. Not wanting to anger my so-called dad again. It was the best breakfast I've ever had, being honest. That was the only part of the day I really enjoyed. I almost took a bite out of my pancakes when I looked down at a rotten hardened piece of strange-looking meat covered with maggots. I dropped my silverware and staggered out of my seat, covering my mouth to keep me from vomiting from the stench. I looked around and everything was gray. All the color was gone. No more fancy table dinners with laced cloth. All the food was rotten. I gagged and almost ran into the bathroom when my mom randomly appeared in front of me and grabbed my arm tightly. Where are you going, honey bunch? Don't you want to finish your breakfast? She grinned and looked back at the table. So did I, seeing my dad and brother staring at me blankly. Her grip tightened, almost cutting off the circulation of my arm, still grinning at me while her eyes widening. Oh, I'm so full, Mom. I want to go lay down. Is that okay with you? I said, trying to act all preppy even though I was trembling like I had Parkinson's disease. My mom, with her head tilted and a grin that was almost touching her cheek, stared at me, twitching her right eye for about 5 seconds before releasing me. Sure, my little peach pie. Anything for you, my dear. She booped my nose with her finger and went back to the table. I blinked again and the color was back. The food was fine, the porcelain plates, the fancy laced tablecloth, the light yellow roses in a vase, everything. I walked to my room, not being able to recognize anything. My home looked like a mansion. This wasn't my home. And those people downstairs were not my family. I finally stumbled to my room, getting lost in the maze of halls. I looked out my window. It was unusually bright outside, the clouds looked fake, too perfect. They weren't moving, either. The grass was an unreal shade of green with yellow and white flowers sprouted all around the street. All of our houses are the same, too. The same design, shape. But different pastel colors. I cried for about 20 minutes when I grabbed my phone and texted my next-door neighbor, Annie. I don't know her, but maybe the same thing's happening to her. I copied our text chain. Here's the conversation. Annie. Hey, it's Harper. Do you remember what happened last night? Harper, can you come to my house? Something really strange is going on. I'm scared. Me too, Annie, but I can't leave. My parents and brother are. I saw Annie staring at me, waving and smiling out of my window. Sometimes we do see each other through our windows, but she doesn't say hi. Harper. Annie, why are you smiling at me like that? What the hell do you mean? Through your window, Annie. I can see you. No answer for about 5 minutes. Harper, I'm not doing that. That's not me. No one's at my window. But I can see you, waving and smiling at me. What the fuck? What's happening? Why is everything the same? I don't know, Annie. I don't know. Thinking about it, it couldn't have been Annie. The smiling Annie didn't even have her phone in her hand. Do you think we're not in the same place? What? Like, each of every single person in the neighborhood is in their own little fucked up fancy world. Harper, I tried leaving. I said I was going for a bike ride. I biked to the exit of the neighborhood and there's gates. I asked the nearest house for the code and they didn't answer. They just fucking smiled at me and slammed the door in my face. Something tells me I shouldn't try to escape. I feel like people are watching me. What? We don't have gates. So you're saying I'm alone and no one hears them? I guess. I don't want to believe it either. What is there to believe? I gotta go, my sister just called me down to play croquet. She doesn't know how to do that, I don't either. We don't even have a croquet set. Just act like the Manny, and I think you'll be fine. N dash. She didn't answer, hopefully she's okay. Then, I heard my brother coming up the stairs. As I heard my brother's light footsteps get closer and closer into my room, all I could think of was, will he harm me? I didn't want to believe it, but I have to keep telling myself that's not my brother. Remember what Annie said. I was caught off guard by my thoughts when I realized my brother was standing at the entrance of my room. Shadows lurked behind him, even when the lights were turned on. May I come in, dear sister? He asked in the same emotionless robotic tone. Yeah, sure, Chris. Come on in, I guess. I would have said it more nicely and in a proper fancy way like the rest of my imposter doppelganger family, but I'm not used to being treated this nicely by my brother. He's only 8 and I do love him. Although he's a complete shithead, I couldn't bring myself to hurt him. It's just not in me. If he pulls any Children of the Corn shit, I wouldn't know what to do. He sat in front of me, with great posture and his hands in his lap, looking up and grinning at me. Would you like to play a board game? Chris cheerily said. He tilted his head just like Mon did. I was too afraid to say no, thinking of how my mother's grip got insanely strong when I left the table, then loosened when I acted all nice about it. Sure, buddy. What do you want to play? Chris cutting me off. Monopoly. He quietly stated, the grin now gone, replaced with his head going down low, his deep empty eyes looking at me Pennywise style. He suddenly perked back up and that stupid fucking grin was on his face again. All they do is grin. Oh, okay, I got up slowly and got Monopoly, which was in his room. It used to be Chris's favorite game. Now it's Fortnite, which I despise with all my heart and soul. I looked at the box and a tear fell on it. Where the hell am I? I asked myself, falling to my knees. His room had a strange stench. Like rotting flesh. Hair pure. Oh, Harper. What are you waiting for? Come on over here, silly. I went back to my room, and then we played. He didn't even look at the fucking game when we played. He just gawked at me. It was getting dark out. Then, I made a really big mistake. I won. He then slowly raised his head up and said no. No what? Good game though. Maybe we can play again and dash. No, no, his head violently shaking as his voice got deeper and deeper, almost growling. He started to charge at me. I got up and tried to run, but my dad stopped me in my tracks. He looked at me, then looked at Chris, who was 1 inch away from me. Dad looked at him with bloodshot eyes, quickly put his hand over his head. Chris stopped chanting gibberish and charging at me. He squeezed past me and picked up frozen Chris by the head and carried him off to his bedroom. I stood there with my mouth open for about 2 minutes, comprehending what just happened. Out of frustration, I kicked the game board and threw all the fake money. I was yelling when I heard my mother's voice. Her regular, sweet, tender voice. She was calling for me. She was yelling. I could only hear it faintly though. Harper. Harper. It was like music to my ears. I cried and laughed. Mom. No answer. Mom. No answer. Mom, please answer me, no answer. I landed on my knees again, cradling myself pathetically in my own tears. Then I heard a knock on the door. What troubles you, my dear? Mom too, I'll call them that. Dad too, Chris too, hell, even my fucking hamster was weird. Hamburger too, yes, I named my hamster that, asked in a surprisingly concerned tone. I didn't answer though. I flinched when I felt her cold hand touch my shoulder. She whispered into my ear, I made some warm cookies for you, warm milk as well. It was oddly comforting. That all went away though when I turned around and saw that stupid grin. I wanted to smack it off her fucking face. It was so lifeless. I would like some. Good. She wiped the tears off my face and went to get the platter of cookies off my dresser. It smelled delicious. But I remember what happened with the pancakes before. She handed me the platter and my warm milk, patted my back and gave me a cold kiss on the cheek. Call me if you need me, she said before leaving. I closed the door behind me when she walked away. Fuck your stupid cookies. I know what you're doing. Looking up at the sky. You're trying to mess with my mind, huh? That won't work. That won't work. I threw the cookies into the spotless porcelain toilet and flushed it down. After I flushed it, black ooze started gurgling and bubbling out of the toilet. I yelped and slammed the toilet cap down. I started to cry again. I drank my milk, as I was very thirsty. Thankfully there wasn't any maggots. I am enjoying these nice luxuries though, there's so much tea dash. Fuck. I really need to get out of here. I stayed up late. I couldn't sleep anyways. I snuck downstairs to see Mom too and Dad too glaring at the fireplace, both holding a cup of coffee in the same position, same hand. They didn't move, so I tiptoed downstairs to sneak out. Fatal mistake. A floorboard creaked and Mom 2 and Dad 2 snapped their heads at a sickening backwards angle, like the fucking Exorcist. They got up and charged at me like Chris did, only faster and with grins still on their faces. I ran out the door, but grabbed my dad's shotgun on the way out. It seemed like they couldn't leave their house, because they just watched me run away, the door wide open. With those stupid fucking grins still slapped on their faces. I sprinted until I was at the exit, only to be stopped by gates. I tried to climb over, avoiding the sharp ends. I was almost free when an invisible barrier stopped me. It burned my right leg really badly. I screamed in pain and fell to the ground. That blaring siren went off again, it must have triggered it somehow. I checked the time. 2:47 a.m. Just like last time. I eventually got myself up, only to find everyone in the neighborhood were leaving their houses and walking towards me. I tried running, but my burnt leg was no help. I limped as fast as I could, even though my neighbors were walking, with some strange device. I shoved some people, and shot some that were more aggressive. It was hard, but it helped knowing those are not my neighbors. I made it to the forest. Everyone was chanting my name in an angry voice, getting more and more intense until the point where they were screaming it. The voices were getting louder, so I ran faster. I blame aware that I was running over bodies. Bodies, with their stomachs cut open perfectly. Their eyes were rolled back, but didn't have any veins. They were all in the same perfect position, arms straight by their sides. Legs, straight and pointed. There wasn't blood, just a white milky substance and circular gray pods gushing out of their sliced bodies, sorta looked like bursting boba, or the stuff they put in that boba tea. Whatever it was, it scared the fuck out of me. It was a graveyard, for the imperfect. While getting out of there, trying to step over the mass of deceased bodies but failing miserably, I slipped and fell down a hill, landing in a creek. I went to get up, but the same distorted voice from the alert, telling me to stay in. I did. Before I knew it, something was pulling me underwater. A strong, fast force that I could not fight no matter how hard I tried. I was being pulled down a hole. In the creek. I started to lose consciousness as I went deeper and deeper into this hole. Then everything went blank. I woke up in the same spot on the couch when I fell asleep with my family when the siren started. I was back in my sweatpants and purple dinosaur hoodie, but I was dirty, surprisingly not wet though. I got up and looked around frantically, no one. I searched everywhere for doppelgangers, holding up my gun while turning every corner. I think I'm back home. I left my house, looked for Annie at her house, no one. She was right. Everyone is in their world. I thought all hope was lost, but I remembered I could text. The creek. It's the way out. I went back down to the creek. There were more holes. Multiple. With names labeled on them. Kelsey, my mom. She had a hole. My fucking hamster had a hole. Everyone in the neighborhood had a hole. What do I do? I tried texting, no service. No one is answering my calls. The police won't be able to handle this. Wait. I just got a text from another contact named Danny saying, "Where are you?" It's not the same person I had that chat with. That's it, I'm going down the holes. I'm getting my family and this whole neighborhood back, or what's left of it. I grabbed my dad's shotgun that I bought with me while escaping my fake home and got in the water. I stepped in the sinkhole and whoosh, I was in the other world. How am I not wet? I thought to myself. I walked out of the forest, past the bodies with orbs overflowing out of their mouths, and finally got to the neighborhood. Same pastel houses. Same motionless clouds. Same extremely green grass with a perfectly symmetrical flower pattern. God, I hated this place. I needed to find my brother. I glanced at my fake home and cocked the gun. As I was walking towards my house, Mrs. Bentley too was outside watering her plants, frozen in a bent-over position. The real Mrs. Bentley was very old, and was in a wheelchair. Looks like her doppelganger got an upgrade. I almost made it to my house when Annie too suddenly appeared in front of me. "How are you doing today, Harper?" Smiling with that nauseating Joker grin. Hello, Annie. Wonderful as always, how do you do?" I gagged in my mind after saying that. "Well, I'm just fantastic." Annie looks down at my shotgun, notices I'm back in my hoodie, with dirt all over me. Her smile turned into an expressionless stare, and she started crying. Again, with no emotion. She started to walk closer. I backed up and she started screaming, charging at me. I pulled the trigger and kicked her lifeless body. It was cruel, but I needed to make sure she was dead. Her body convulsed for 1 second, then her mouth started gurgling the same white liquid as the people in the forest. I knew 2 men in white and blue suits came out of nowhere and walked next to each other at the same pace towards Annie too. They picked her up and walked into the forest, not paying any attention to me. Neither did anyone outside. Maybe if I don't acknowledge them or talk to them, they won't freak out. I tested it out by randomly shooting Mrs. Bentley from a distance, not talking to her. No one paid attention, didn't even flinch. Another pair of men in suits took her into the forest. Yes. It worked. Ha. I realized how dark my thought just was, but it was for the best. I finally got to my house. I slowly pushed the door open and sneaked in. My family, included Harper too, me, and my real brother were frozen at the breakfast table. They were just sitting there, not eating anything. My brother looked happy. But I knew it was him. He just looked at the food, he didn't want to eat it. But it wasn't food at the table. It looked like flesh, covered in those gray, bursting boba orb thingies. I held up my gun, my fingers shaking at the trigger. I felt bad, but they're not my family. That thought was the only thing keeping me sane. PSSST, I tried to whisper, but I needed my brother to hear me. PSSSST, this time, he looked over and saw me. My eyes lit up at the sight of him. But he looked at me and nodded his head no. I think he was signaling me to leave and come back later, but I'm not taking that chance. I waited outside the house for a while, until they were done their breakfast. I peered through the window. No one was at the breakfast table. I went in the house, walked past Mom too and Dad too and found my way to Chris's room. I saw him, playing with a Rubik's Cube on his bed. "Chris." I ran up and hugged him. "Hi Harper, what are you doing here? If you're here to rescue me, I want to stay. It's so nice here." "Wait, what?" I said, baffled, extremely confused by what he just said. "Harper, it's dangerous here, you should go." "And you heard me. I want to stay." I walked up to him and sat down in front of him, grabbing his shoulders. "Chris, what about Mom and Dad? They miss you dearly, I mean a lot." The fancy doppelganger language was getting to my head, and I'm sure they would be great to have you back. Plus, I didn't come all this day to get attitude you just because little whiny Chris won't stay. "Go away," he screamed, pushing me. "Shoo. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not leaving without you." "MOM. Mom." "Chris, that's not our mom." "Yes, it is." Oh God, he's brainwashed. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I hit Chris with my gun accidentally while turning around, knocking him out. I know, but hey, at least he's coming with me for sure now. Soon enough, Mom too was standing at the doorway smiling, with a fucking axe. She ran at me swinging it. She missed and it hit the wall. While she was trying to get it out, I shot her. I grabbed Chris and ran. I made it to the worlds and found Mrs. Bentley too and Annie too added to the pile of people, with their stomachs cut open, pouring out the gray orbs. I got to the creek and went back down Chris's hole. I got back to our real house, laid him down on my couch, and tied him up in case he tried to escape or make things worse. I went back into the forest and jumped into my mom's hole. I regained conscious in the forest, now in my mom's hole. I did the same thing, go past the houses, Mrs. Bentley too, everything. I winded up at the house and burst in, not scared to shoot. At least that's what I thought I was going to do. I walked in on my mom crying, clutching a knife in her hand, with the doppelganger family tied up, not making a sound. They were on the floor, not even struggling. Mom. She turned around quickly, dropping the knife. Baby. Oh my God. She ran over to me and hugged me tight, but then stopped and had a confused look. Wait, that's not you. No, I don't know what they are. But I have Chris back home. I knew it wasn't you, she sighed in relief. I knew it. I tied you guys up because I don't really know why the neighborhood, it's so different. How did you get here? Where are we? What do you mean Chris is back H-? It's okay Mom, I've been there. I'll explain everything that's happened when we get back. I grabbed her hand and ran out to the forest. We stopped when we came across some of the neighbors circled around the dead bodies near the creek, holding hands. Their mouths were covered with that milky liquid. Holy shit, did they eat the dead bodies? My mom grabbed me by the hand and started to run back to the neighborhood. No. We need to get to the holes to get back home. The holes. Trust me, let's go. We ran past what looked like a ritual and got to the creek. My mom stared at the sinkholes, baffled once again. I said to get in, she hesitated at first but she did. I was about to go, but took one last look at the circled corpses. They were gone. I jumped in, waking up with my mom tugging at my shoulder saying, "Wake up." I took her back to the house, to greet Chris. I let her have her moment of happiness, before telling her dad the rest of the neighborhood are still in those fucking holes. I told her I was going, she didn't want me to at first but I explained to her everything that happened. She should stay with Chris anyways, he looked terrified before he saw us, he had his head in his knees and was sitting in the corner. I think he knew everyone was gone. The neighborhood was dead. Empty. Lifeless. I hugged my mom and went back into the forest. At this point, I knew what to do but had to be cautious at the same time. I stared at my dad's hole, jumped in, woke up, got up, started walking. Something was wrong, it smelled like something was burning. The closer I got to the neighborhood, the stronger the smell got. It wasn't long until I saw the dim orange light, covered by smoke. All the houses were on fire. Dad! I thought. I ran closer to the glowing light, covering my mouth and coughing, trying not to inhale the smoke. I searched endlessly through the streets. Behind the sound of the crackling burning houses, I could hear the siren. I never hated a sound more than this one. I walked and walked until I saw someone in the middle of the street. They were sitting, at first I thought it was a doppelganger, but it was my dad, talking to himself repeatedly saying, "I killed them all. I killed them all. I killed them all." He had a box of matches in his hand. He started the fires. I ran up to him and grabbed his shoulder, he flinched and pulled out a bloody cleaver, putting it down realizing it was me. "Is that you, Harper?" "Yes." "Come on. What the hell are you doing? I thought you were dead." "I killed all of you." "That isn't me. Everyone here isn't them. Just come with me, we need to get back." I pulled him through the smoke, struggling. I felt like I was going to pass out, but we needed to get out. I was not going to die here. Neither was my dad. The adrenaline helped at least. We made it the forest. We both fell to the ground, coughing until it felt like our lungs exploded. My dad crawled over to me and hugged me. I was really satisfied that I had my family back, but I couldn't help thinking about Annie, or Jameson, my boyfriend. He lives in another neighborhood, but what if this is happening to everybody? It can't be just us. If so, why just us? We had a fight before the sirens began, so I didn't text him just because I was mad at him. God, I can be a bitch, I deeply regret it. My heart sunk at the thought he might be dead. Anyways, me and my dad got up and I told him to get in his hole. He laughed, something I didn't hear in a long time. I told him it was our way out. He refused, so I pushed him in. I chuckled and went in after him. I woke up to Dad carrying me by the shoulders through the forest. I weakly told him that Mom and Chris were at the house, and to trust me and just go. He's always been stubborn, but this time he listened. He probably listened because he just wanted to at least have hoped they were alive. We arrived at the house, our mom anxiously waiting on the couch. I looked down, I was completely blackened by the smoke, same with my dad. My mom greeted my dad, laid us down and got us drink of water. I was extremely weak and tired, and my dad had a huge bloody gash on his back. It looked like he got hit with an axe. Me and my family talked for a while. My mom thanked me. I don't know why, I just did what I had to do. It wasn't long before I got up, wanting to go to Annie's hole. My dad grabbed me before I could grab his shotgun. Honey, don't go. Please. Dad dash, my mom put her hand on my dad's shoulder, hopefully to let me go to Annie's hole. Harper, you've been through enough. I can handle it. I whined. It was humorous thinking about it. I could imagine begging my dad like I was asking for a toy I wanted. Pretty please, can I go into the hole? It's no time to make jokes, but fuck it. The past couple of days have been total shit. I deserve a laugh. You almost died, Harper. Can we just sit through this, call the police, and figure out how dash? There's nothing to figure out, Dad. I can figure this out, neither can you. No one can. There's no explaining this. And the cops? Are you kidding me? The cops wouldn't believe us. They wouldn't know what the hell to do. Think of their faces when we say the entire neighborhood are trapped inside these sinkholes in the forest creek with doppelgangers. What will they say, Dad? He sat there silent, took a deep breath, got up and went to his office, came back with his box of shotgun shells, and handed them to me. If you're not back in a couple of hours, I'm coming to get you. All right, fine. But remember, if you enters Annie's hole, you have to leave out of Annie's hole. If you don't, I think you might get back to your own world. And you don't want to go back to yours. Got it, now go before I change my mind. He said reluctantly. My mom and dad hugged me, and Chris waved goodbye. He looked happier, compared to how he was before. I walked through the forest. And stared at Annie's hole. I'm coming, Annie. Hang in there. I jumped into the portal, my consciousness slowly fading. I woke up, smelling the stench of the corpses. While getting myself off the ground, I heard screams. I darted my way over to Annie's house. I opened the door and Harper too crashed into me while what it seems like trying to kill Annie. I fell to the ground and I met eyes with me. It was really strange seeing myself any other way than a camera or mirror. Harper. I tried to respond, but Harper too now had her hands around my throat, squeezing tighter and tighter, with that big fat grin on her face, or my face I guess. I tried reaching for the shotgun, but it was out of my reach. We rolled around for what it seems like eternity. I got on top of her and started punching her like crazy, until my knuckles felt sore. She didn't stop, she was insanely strong. She eventually escaped my grasp and pushed me to the ground, strangling me again. "Annie," I weakly said, as I pointed to the gun. It wasn't too long until I realized she was fighting off her mom who had a cleaver. We're so fucked, I thought to myself, defeated. But then, Harper 2's legs slipped, no longer pinning my full body down, and I got a hold of my legs back. I kicked her in the chest and grabbed my shotgun. Before I could shoot her, she shot me with that weird device thing the people were carrying around when I tried to escape through the gates. I fell to the floor, Annie still fighting her mom. Everything swirled and spun around me until I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was floating in what seemed like space, but dark gray with swirly clouds of white. It looked like an ink drop on water, or paint spilled in water. Like those iPhone live wallpapers. Trippy, but I needed to get out of here. I swam through the dark mass, not finding any way out. I was losing hope. Then, I saw me. Well, Harper too. I stared at her for a second, then went over to her. "What do you want?" I tried to ask firmly, but coming out weak. She didn't answer. She just snapped her head back at me, but this time she wasn't smiling. She had a look of intense fear. She looked at me and started clawing at her cheek. She clawed more and more until she was ripping her skin off. She peeled a thick layer of flesh, revealing a gray, oily yet smooth surface. She kept peeling until a large oval-like gray head covered with slime appeared. It opened its yellow glowing eyes and screeched. That was the sound I heard when the sirens went off. It was the exact same. I turned around and swam as fast as I could. The thing started following me, now in its full form. Covered in ooze, long huge spider legs with claws, and a see-through body, filled with those tiny gray orbs. It tried impaling me with its leg a couple times, while making this weird clicking noise. It sounded like bone cracking. I came across a hole. I didn't know if it would do anything, but I jumped inside of it anyways. I just wanted to get away from that thing. I was in Annie's world, once again. I woke up in the same position with Annie still fighting her mom. I looked over and Harper too was gone, somehow. I grabbed the shotgun quickly and blasted Annie's mom too. Annie looked at her mom and then looked at me. "Annie, how long was I gone?" "Like 1 second after the second version of you shot you." "How did you get here?" Annie said, breathless. It felt like I was gone for hours. I told Annie everything that happened, including the holes. She didn't seem that shocked. I wouldn't have either, after all this. We went back the forest and went through the hole. When we got back to my house, she said she wanted to go with me to find her parents. I hesitated but agreed. So we did. Hours went by and we got her parents back, and her dog. And for those who are asking about my hamster, yes, Hamburger is alive and well. I'm not going to go into details, because we basically did the same thing over and over again. Annie was reunited with her parents and her dog. She tried explaining to them what happened, but called the cops anyways. They asked Annie's family and mine ridiculous questions. They looked pretty baffled too, but we all told them the same story. It has been 5 days since this happened, so they could just file a missing persons case on almost everyone in the damn neighborhood. I didn't tell them about the holes. I told everyone not to, since they might quarantine it or something. I not really know what the cops did. They searched the houses and left. I'm pretty sure they filed a missing persons case. They had to. I was tired of getting people out of the doppelganger worlds, but I had to. I got one person out of a family and told them go get their family, and the rules. Exit through the portal you went in while getting someone out. You should dress fancy if you can and act like them, bring guns, and everything else. And that sorta worked. Some people were too afraid to go in. Some came back with the dead bodies of their family. Some came out without their family, saying they couldn't find them. But it was happening very slowly. If more people are in there for any longer, they'll die. I couldn't stop thinking about that weird place I was in with that thing. I think he's the cause of this. I have to find it and kill it. I went through Mrs. Bentley's hole with a backpack filled with weapons and thought about how to make the doppelgangers get their weird weapons out. Why didn't they just shoot everyone with it when they had the chance? What makes them take it out anyways? The only time I saw them do it was when I was trying to escape through the gates, and the sirens went off, and when I was fighting myself. Maybe if they discover something that's imperfect, like me escaping through the gate, you're probably not supposed to do that, or having two of the same people in one world. So, I went to my house and found myself. We fought, and soon she pulled out the strange-looking gun and shot me. I waited and waited until I was in the space-like void. I searched and searched for the beast. I was giving up hope when I heard that blood-curdling screech. I could see if, floating yet charging at me. It's absolutely terrified, but I had to kill this thing. It just felt right. I shot it with my gun, useless. The bullets deflected. Well shit. I thought, how the hell am I going to do this? While I was getting out a knife from my backpack, the creature sliced my arm pretty bad with its sharp legs. I tried chopping its legs off, no use. It kicked me around like a soccer ball when I tried to get close to it. It was hard, but I got on top of it and tried axing its head. It broke the fucking axe. Useless. It cute my cheek and the back of my leg. I cried out in pain, mostly from the pain, some from the thought that I may not be able to kill this thing. Then, it spoke. You cannot kill me, reverse. Gather the pieces, it said in the same, strange layered voice from the alert on my TV. It felt like it was talking in my mind. While I was floating, holding my leg, I saw its stomach filled with pods. It was made of a different material than the steel-like legs, almost like a thin layer of jello. I also had a box of matches. I swam under the thing, grabbing onto its stomach. It jerked around and tried to reach me with its legs but failed. I got the matches out, struggling to hold on to its oily smooth skin covered in slime. I cut open its stomach and threw the match inside the little gray orbs. It let out a different screech this time. It sounded like defeat. I let go of its stomach and swam past it, seeing it now floating in the air, covered in flames. The thing struggled to shake off the flames. No. Cannot finish I must, the beautiful and the dead. After it said that, it started speaking gibberish like Chris did when we played Monopoly. I watched him burn until he couldn't speak anymore, and then I left. I soon found the hole and got back to Mrs. Bentley's world. When I got there, everyone was on fire. All the doppelgangers, on the floor in flames. It made me happy to see them burn. What a dark thought, but whatever. I got Mrs. Bentley out of her world and got back to the real one. When I woke up, I saw the people who hadn't made it back from the holes yet. Everyone was back. They were unconscious outside of their holes. Some were awake already. Confused and in a daze. I got them back to their houses, and of course, a bunch of people called the cops. They thought we were all bullshitting this. But they were confused as well. I wonder why other people didn't go looking for some people in our neighborhood. Everyone is pretty spooked about this whole thing, but I'm just glad almost everyone is back. Some didn't. Someone called an ambulance for the injured and the deceased. I texted my boyfriend since I had signal again, no answer. He must still be mad at me. I felt bad about fighting with him and missed him awfully. I drove to his neighborhood. The streets were oddly empty. Only a couple other cars were there, which is odd. We usually have a lot of traffic. I got to his eerily quiet neighborhood and knocked on his door with a knot in my stomach. No answer. I started to panic, so I went in. No one is there. I ran to other houses and searched everywhere. Oh my God. There's no one here.
10 True Disturbing Demon and Ghost Horror Stories of 2025. Compilation 1.
Story number 1. I've always had some kind of affinity with the paranormal. When I was a teenager, I wouldn't stop writing extremely dark, creepy poetry. I have always been a loner, a one best friend kind of person, if any at all. Anyway, onto the story. My parents divorced when I was young. When that happened, I became depressed and spent a lot of time alone. We moved in with my grandparents, and they gave us a little house near theirs. It was so close that we didn't have to walk 5 meters to reach their door. My mom always spent time with them, while I preferred to be alone in our little house. One time, I was sleeping in the dark there. I dreamed that there was a guy with a black face sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at me. I awoke terrified, with that dreadful feeling that there was someone there with me. I snapped out of bed, turned on the lights, and ran to my grandpa's house. I sat beside my grandmother and said, "That house can be so creepy." She replied, "Of course. 2 guys died there from gas leaks while they were renting the place. We found them a week later." She said it so casually, like it was nothing, but to me, it felt like a slap in the face. That was only the warm-up, though. As I got older, my mom remarried, and my grandpa moved to another house of his, about 150 meters from the previous one. I was left to rot in the old one, living alone for an entire year and a half. My grandpa's old house was big, old, and creepy. Even though that new house wasn't far from me, I saw things there, shadow people. I remember avoiding most areas in the house. My living consisted of staying in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. The rest of the house felt oppressive, like I was always being watched. I was a student finishing my graduation project, so I didn't leave the house much, except to buy groceries. There were 2 long hallways in the house. The first led to the bathroom, and the second led to my grandparents' old room. It was a big room, always locked, as they kept their stuff there. When you stood in the hallway, you couldn't see the door at the end of it. It was so dark, like an endless hallway of darkness. I always avoided that area. Somehow, you could just feel when something was wrong. Late at night, around 2 or 3 a.m., I would always hear banging on the door. I brushed it off and tried to play courageous because I had no choice. I had to stay in that house. I had nowhere else to live. I always locked the door to the living room, turned on the TV, and tried to fall asleep. The door didn't lock all that well, so I used a chair as an extra barrier. One night, I wasn't feeling well. I woke up burning with a fever, almost hallucinating, when I heard the chair move. That's when I saw it, a small, dark, shadowy figure sneaking a peek at me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got up, switched on the light, and saw the chair moved out of place, leaving the door slightly open. I started crying. I called my parents, but neither of them answered. To be fair, it was 3 a.m. I prayed, tried calming down, and convinced myself I was imagining things. 2 months later, I was watching a video about the jinn on YouTube with the speakers loud. For those who don't know, jinn are creatures in Islamic folklore, akin to demons. The video was titled, 30 Facts You Didn't Know About Jinn. The last fact said that jinn live among us, and one of them might even be watching you right now. I giggled and said, "I'm not scared," but I knew I'd regret it. That same night, I played some Quran readings, as it's supposed to keep shadow people and jinn away according to my religion. I kid you no, at 2 a.m., I woke up to 3 shadow people dancing. One was by my feet, another by my head, and the third standing near my face. They made a strange noise, almost like static. It was so irritating. I screamed, "Leave me alone," and they disappeared. Soon after, I began suffering from insomnia. I couldn't sleep at night anymore. I spent my nights studying, working on my project, cooking, watching TV, playing video games, and drifting off around 6 a.m. when daylight broke. Once, I went to sleep and began dreaming. It was so realistic, it didn't even feel like a dream. I started hearing whispers, violent whispers, like a chorus from hell. The closest description would be the soundtrack from Dante's Inferno. It was quiet but loud, evil, and aggressive. It was always at the same time, but the sound was always different. In the dream, I stood and traced the source of the sound to the creepy room at the end of the hallway, which had probably become haunted from being locked for so long. As I got closer, a man emerged from the darkness. He was bald, short, and muscular, with veins protruding from his arms. He looked straight into my soul as he approached. I began reciting prayers, and at the same time, I heard my cousin screaming from the stairs on my left, telling me to flee. I tried to move but felt something pulling me back. Somehow, I made it through the open door and gasped for air. I thought this thing was chasing me. It was in my house, and I didn't want to go back. That's when I woke up, to the same violent whispering in my ear. After some time, my grandparents came to stay for a bit. My grandmother would always sleep with the lights on. One night, I woke up feeling strange. I kid you not, there was a giant little girl holding something in her left arm. She had the wildest eyes I had ever seen, grinning at me. She stared right through me while holding a dwarf-like figure with a tail. Here's the punctuated and logically divided version of your story. That's when I woke up to the whispering in my ear once more. After a while, my grandparents came to stay for a bit. My grandmother would always sleep with the light on at night. One night, I woke up feeling strange, and I kid you not, there was a giant little girl holding something in her left arm. She had the wildest eyes I've ever seen, grinning at me. She stared right through me, holding a little dwarf-like figure. He had a tail, grayish skin, and was staring at my grandmother. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to go back to sleep and ignored them. On another occasion, I was sleeping and actually conversing with someone, or something. They thought I was dreaming, but when I opened my eyes, I couldn't see them. Yet, I could still hear them speaking to me. You should let us in. You're done for anyway. Nobody wants you. Your parents left. We're the only ones that will help you now. I was afraid of them. I didn't trust them or what they were saying. They were pressuring me, and I felt lost, desperate, and alone. I opened my eyes, crying and a complete mess. One other night, I dreamed that I was in a very large bedroom in a castle. It was fancy and well decorated. There was an old woman who looked like a cliché witch attending a funeral. She kept asking me to let her in. She was very angry, and after a while of making fun of her, she left. Then, another one came and took her place. This one was deaf and mute. It was a very strange dream. After that, my grandmother started sleeping in her old bedroom. She accused me of running around her bed, throwing things at her in the middle of the night, and pulling the covers off. I didn't know what she was talking about. One night, she woke up screaming, and we found half of her things burned beside her candles. There was no light and no fire source in the room. After that incident, she left. Fast forward a while, I grew up, graduated, and started working. I got a job out of the country. I left my current work in the Middle East and stayed alone in a room in local housing. One morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. to find white fog in my face. I was covered in it. I stayed there for a while, watching it, and then it turned completely black and vanished. I have no idea what it was. Story number 2. In 1996, when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me, she decided to play with a Ouija board along with her sister. My grandmother had died about 3 months earlier, and they wanted to see if they could contact her. My mom and aunt said they had talked to what they believed was their mother, who had tragically passed away in that house. They spoke for about 30 minutes until the planchette made a sharp movement and the air turned ice cold. The planchette began moving very fast on the board, repeating the word mine, mine, mine. This really scared my mom, so they stopped the session. A few weeks later, my mom went into labor. At the time, this frightened her because I was a month and a few weeks early. When I was born, I was so small that I had to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks. All was well when my mom and I finally left. Fast forward to when I was 4. I started having horrible night terrors of me sitting at the top of the stairs in my house. In the dream, it was daytime, but the house still felt dark. My feet were stuck to the floor like quicksand, and I would scream and scream for what felt like hours. At the end of the dream, I would always see something crawling up to me slowly. It was very skinny, with long limbs, black skin, and extremely long fingers tipped with even longer, dark fingernails. Its eyes were big and burning red. I had this dream so often that eventually, when the creature would start to appear, I learned to wake myself up. These dreams became a near-nightly occurrence. I told my mom about it, and she said I shouldn't stay up late scaring myself with stories. My mom's attitude started to change when my little sister began saying creepy things. At the time, my sister was 2.5 years old and very smart. One night, my sister and I were in my room getting tucked in. Every night, my sister and mom played a little game before bed. My mom would tell my sister to spell a word, and my sister would spell it to earn a prize. One night, as my mom was saying goodnight to us, my sister suddenly said, "Mummy, can you spell black man better run?" She said it in a most sing-song, horror movie kind of way. That night, I woke up to something very odd, an old lady standing at the end of my bed. Honestly, she looked so real that I thought an actual old woman had broken into my room. I screamed, turned on the light, and she wasn't there. Totally creeped out, I kept the light on because I couldn't sleep in the dark anymore, it was too paralyzing. All of a sudden, I woke up in darkness again. I didn't even remember closing my eyes to sleep. There she was, that old woman at the edge of my bed. This time, I knew she wasn't human. She had blue skin, rotting teeth, and unnaturally blue eyes. She was staring at me, smiling. Then, she began to laugh. It started with a small giggle, but soon, she was cackling. She laughed so hard that she threw her head back, acting like a mental patient. I was in such shock that I couldn't even cry, my mouth hummed agape. Her laughter grew louder, and her mouth began to unhinge, stretching like that of a snake. Then suddenly, mid-laugh, she stopped, snapped her head back, and in a fast, low man's voice, she said, "If you're scared, cover your head, little piggy, because I'm not gonna stop." Terrified, I immediately covered my face with my blanket. Right away, she started laughing again. I lay there for what felt like hours, trembling under the covers, scared to death. Eventually, I woke up in daylight. After this happened, I told my mom. She called my grandpa, who was a pastor. He came over, blessed the house, and for the most part, everything was okay. One thing did happen after a while, though. When I was a teenager, I moved downstairs to my own bedroom while my sister stayed upstairs. Every night, without fail, I would wake up at 4:30 a.m. I would hear creaking on the stairs and footsteps coming toward my door. My door would slowly open, but no one was ever there. After a minute or two, it would slowly close again. We lived in that house for my entire childhood. By the time I was 17, I hadn't noticed anything creepy in years, except for the door. One night, my mom, sister, and I were all on her bed watching TV. It was June, and that day we had horrible thunderstorms. The storms got so bad that the power went out. We decided to go to sleep since it was late anyway. That night, all three of us woke up at the exact same time. It was still dark, and the room was unusually cold for summer, especially with the AC off. Then, all three of us gasped as we saw a figure, at least 7 feet tall, standing in the bedroom doorway. Suddenly, I heard that laugh. The same laugh I had heard so many years ago. I knew who it was. The creature whispered something to us, something that is burned into my memory, "I found you." My entire body went into shock. He found us. The black man. Then he vanished, like he was never there. Nothing happened for years after that, until I moved to Florida with my then boyfriend, now husband. My husband worked third shift, so I often found myself unable to sleep at night. One night, around 1 a.m., I went outside to smoke a joint. I have a very small house with a small front yard, so I planned to smoke quickly and run back inside. As I finished and started walking back, I noticed something, an impossibly long, black arm with sharp claws stretching down from the roof. It looked like it was reaching to grab my hair. It was inhuman. I ran inside, panicked, and told my husband. At first, he was skeptical and worried about my health. That is, until he saw it too. The black thing was on top of our roof. That was just the other day. Can anyone tell me why he's on my roof? I'm just wondering when he's going to try to come inside. Story number 3. I come from a military family, so I've lived all over the country. I've never been able to keep friends for long, and I also have terrible social anxiety, which makes it hard to make friends in the first place. This story starts when I lived in rural Newfoundland for about 3 years at age 14. I had no friends, a terrible home life, and was pretty depressed. Our house sat on about an acre of land with a river separating us from endless acres of raw forest, full of ATV trails. The forest was spooky, and I have tons of stories about the strange things I saw there, stories that would rival most horror tales. I had no friends. My home life was pretty terrible, and I was pretty depressed at this point. I lived on about an acre of land, with a river separating us from what felt like a million acres of raw forest. The forest had a bunch of ATV trails cutting through it. It was spooky, and I have tons of stories about what I saw in there, stories that would make most horror movies look like a joke. Of note are places like the Bear Trap Forest, the 40-foot swamp, the random abandoned suburb, and the house in the middle of nowhere. But those are tales for another time. It was late August. For many weeks, my parents had been telling me about strange hoots and hollers coming from our backyard. They had seen flashlights and assumed it was just some kids trying to break into our garage to steal beer. I'd heard it too, normally in the evenings. There were just a couple of voices periodically hollering. One night, I heard several voices speaking from just across the river in the woods. It didn't seem like a big deal. A lot of kids hung out in those woods, and, with my oppressive social anxiety, I had no desire to talk to them. After hearing the kids for weeks, one day, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I decided to see what was so amusing. I ventured into the woods, walking about 300 feet down an ATV trail my neighbor used. That's when I met one of them. The kid I met was called Jack. He was a year or two younger than me and about a foot shorter. He was wearing some really out-of-date clothes. Jack seemed surprised to meet me, but we said our hellos. I told him I had heard them for a while now and came to see what was happening. Jack got super pumped and insisted I follow him to see his friend's project. So, I followed him. We walked into an area that was pretty clear-cut in a dense patch of woods. I knew the area well, I hung out in the woods alone a lot and explored. But this was brand new to me. There were 2 other kids there. One was my age and named Elvis. The other was older, maybe by 2 years, and called Louie. They told me they were working on a treehouse/fort and asked if I wanted to help. Of course, I said yes, I'd never been asked to hang out with anyone before. They showed me around their fort. Now, I need to mention their clothes. When I say they were out of style, I mean early 80s miserable fashion, neon colors, shoulder pads, and a mess. They wore big rubber boots, and their clothes looked new. By that, I mean their outfits showed no signs of wear, no pimples, immaculate hair, and clothes that were crisp as if freshly ironed. I assumed their clothes were hand-me-downs from their parents, as they said they were friends, not brothers. These kids were very nice to me, nicer than anyone else had been. I never got to know them well, though, as they didn't want to talk about their home life. That wasn't surprising for where I lived. We used hatchets, saws, ropes, and nails to make a solid fort. It had 8-foot walls made of birch trees, a table to sit at, and a lookout post in the tallest tree we could find. The place was about the size of a 1-bedroom apartment, and we were all proud of it. One day, we were sitting at the table, talking about our favorite trees or something, when I asked Elvis why I'd never seen him around before. If he lived near me, he'd have to go to my school. There were only 2 schools in town, and no way he lived in the other catchment area. Elvis insisted he did, and he wondered why he'd never met me either. We didn't know the same classmates, same people, or even the same teachers. But whatever. These kids talked to me, and that was enough. About 2 weeks after meeting them and building the fort, I said I needed to go home to get something to eat. I asked if they wanted anything, since the fort was basically in my backyard and my parents always made way too much food. They became downright hostile, not over the food, but at the idea of crossing the river. Louis came up with a story about how crossing a stranger's river was bad luck. I didn't push the issue. Instead, I brought back a pie we could all share. They apologized for getting angry, saying they were just very superstitious. I thought nothing more of it. We had a good rest of the day, planning to explore the woods for some thick pine trees. About a week later, I went back to the fort. We did our usual thing, but this time, the kids looked haggard. Jack, in particular, looked awful, like he had just gotten the beatdown of his life while catching pneumonia 3 times over. I asked if Jack was okay. He said he just had the flu, but they all looked wet, or maybe greasy is a better word. Their hair was slick, their skin shiny and clammy, and their clothes looked terrible. I wasn't shocked, though. These kids wore the same clothes pretty much every day, but so did a lot of the really poor kids in town. We played around for an hour or so before they left. Louis said he'd see me tomorrow, and Jack and Elvis walked away coughing like they'd smoked a pack a day. I had told my parents about these kids. They thought it was weird, but they didn't ask questions. A kid with no friends had just found 3, what was there to question? Interestingly, the nighttime hollering had stopped at this point, and we never saw the flashlights again. The next day, I went back to the fort with a hatchet and a bag of nails in hand. The plan was to give the lookout a roof. When I arrived, the place was wrecked. The walls were torn down, the table was split in half, and the lookout had maybe 1 or 2 pieces left. Most notably, everything was rotting, like it had been sitting there for decades. The table was barely recognizable, and I could see growth in what had been the floor, solid half-tree growth. My only thought was, what the hell? I tried to rationalize that maybe someone had found out about the fort and destroyed it. I waited for the kids the next day. And the next. And the day after that. I waited a week, but they never showed up again. I was dejected and eventually stopped trying. I wanted to look for them, but they had never shown me where they lived, other than saying they lived up the hill. My parents noticed and asked why I wasn't hanging out with the kids anymore. I told them what had happened, but they dismissed it, saying the kids probably didn't want to be my friends anymore, and that I didn't need them. I was sad for a long time after that. Cut to today. I'm 29, and I was telling my wife about these kids I used to hang out with. As I described them, the way they looked and acted, it was a bittersweet memory with a sad ending. My wife looked at me wide-eyed and said, "You hung out with a bunch of spooky ghost kids." At first, I found it crazy, but then she asked, "Did anyone else ever see them?" That's when it hit me, no, they didn't. People had seen flashlights and heard voices, but no one else had ever actually seen the kids. No one, other than me. There were no records I could find of them, no enrollment at the school they supposedly went to, no mention of them in town. They never showed me their house, and they never came to mine, despite my insistence. My wife said it was spooky and that I should probably share this story with others. What do you guys think? Story number 4. I've experienced several things throughout my 36 years that could be considered supernatural or unexplained. When I was a kid, in particular, I dealt with recurring harassment that made me afraid to stay in my room. My fear was so bad that my mom bought me one of those little red bed tents kids in the 80s loved. I ran into some odd situations while at sea in the Navy too. Anyway, over time, I essentially forgot about most of my previous experiences. I became a closed-minded skeptic. Even as an adult, whenever something strange cropped up, I dismissed it as my lack of understanding of the science behind whatever it was I had witnessed. 3 years ago, or maybe a little more, the VA accidentally declared me dead. This was just one in a series of negative events in my life that started to drag down my expectations for the future. Around that time, a buddy of mine, who was like a brother and whom I'd known since I was 6, moved in with me. His life was spiraling downward too. One night, we decided to watch a bunch of YouTube videos on how to summon demons and trade things for a better future. It was just one of those dark periods where nothing seemed to matter anymore. At the same time, two girls related to an ex-girlfriend of mine were living in my finished basement. They needed to escape an abusive family, so I let them stay. The basement had no entry from the main house. You had to leave the house to access it, making it feel like their own little apartment. It was a good deal for a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old. I let them stay rent-free as long as they helped with my son, did some cleaning, and cooked 2 meals a week. I'll come back to this later. For now, I'll mention that it was the two girls who suggested to my buddy and me that we should look for videos about bargaining with the supernatural. The videos weren't particularly helpful, but we decided to start with something simple, The Poor Man's Wager, a game called Charlie. I'm sure most people are aware of what it is, but just in case, you place a pencil on a piece of paper divided into 4 squares, with yes and no written in opposite corners. One pencil sits in the center, and the other pencil is balanced on top of it. Then you ask questions like, Charlie, is X true? The top pencil is supposed to spin gently toward the yes or no answer. We tried it a few times and had enough success that my buddy actually posted a video of the pencil turning on its own to his Facebook account. Invigorated by our success and the potential for what we could gain, we decided to take things a step further. After smoking some very strong weed, we came up with what we called the 30-for-30 trade. The logic was simple. We believed that most people who traded their souls to the devil did so hastily, just to get rich or famous, without negotiating a balanced deal. So, we decided on a fair trade, 30 years of service after death in exchange for 30 years of wealth and success while alive. At the time, I was 33 years old, and I figured 30 years wasn't a bad deal. I didn't want fame. It seemed like more trouble than it was worth. I just wanted enough money to ensure that my 2 sons, who live with me full-time, were cared for forever, and that I could live the rest of my days feeling successful. With that bargain in mind, I provoked my cat until it scratched me enough to draw blood. I pressed my thumb into the cut and then onto the Charlie paper. Looking back, I believe this act was the catalyst for the strange events that have persisted to this day. My buddy, raised Christian, refused to put his own blood on the paper. As we continued, he became less involved, mostly observing as I pushed forward. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I laid out my deal clearly, 30 years of service after death for 30 years of wealth and influence in life. The pencil didn't spin. The lights didn't flicker. There was no sudden cold breeze. However, my buddy and I both experienced the eerie sensation of being watched. We turned around, expecting to see one of the girls or one of my sons, but the house was empty. We were alone. That night, my buddy slept on the sofa, and I dozed off in my recliner, right in front of the coffee table where the bloody Charlie paper rested. Despite feeling uneasy, like someone was watching me, I slept soundly. When I woke the next morning, I followed my usual routine. I didn't even think about the previous night until I grabbed my coffee cup. My buddy was still asleep, as I typically wake up earlier than anyone else in the house. As I sat in the recliner where I had slept, I went to place my coffee on the table and noticed something strange, a handprint on the coffee table, facing me. The fingertips were pointed toward where I had slept. I took a picture of it because it was so unusual. The handprint was smaller than mine. The fingers were thinner, and there were only 4 digits, 3 fingers, and what looked like a thumb. The nails seemed to have left impressions on the table, pointed and claw-like. When I say impressions, I don't mean the table was scarred. It was as if the dark surface of the table had been touched by a hot, sweaty, oddly shaped hand, leaving a smudgy, white imprint. That's why the claw impressions stood out. They seemed unnatural. Even stranger, there was only 1 handprint, not 2, as you'd expect. I placed my hand next to it. My hands were far too large. My buddy's hands were too big as well. My youngest son's hands were too small, and my oldest son's hands were too small. When the girls came up from the basement, I interrupted them before they could tell me about their night and asked them to compare their hands to the impression on the table. Both of their hands were too small as well. Afterward, they told me I had kept them up all night. They thought my buddy and I had gotten drunk and were jamming out to 90s rock and metal. To be fair, that was a legitimate assumption, we did that often. But the night prior, we hadn't. We hadn't had a single drink, and after stumbling upon the Charlie game, we turned off the videos. The only noise had been us talking excitedly at some points. The girls, however, said there was a bunch of loud thumping and constant heavy music. In their words, it was heavy music, though they consider corn to be heavy. The 18-year-old swore she thought we had a full-blown party going on with even more friends over. My sons, however, heard nothing. It was strange, but we all sort of dismissed it as odd and noteworthy, but nothing serious. That night, my buddy and I watched more videos about demons and bargaining with them. One video claimed that just by watching it, you were participating in a demonic summoning. As the night went on, the house felt more uneasy. Every little noise seemed unnatural, making us feel increasingly on edge. Eventually, we turned on Aqua Teen Hunger Force to lighten the mood and passed out in the same spots as the previous night. The following morning, I noticed something strange on the coffee table. I had wiped it clean the day before, erasing the previous handprint. But now, there were two identical impressions on the table. They were facing me, just like the first one. The difference this time was that there were two prints, but once again, each had only 4 digits. The claw-like impressions remained, pointing toward where I had slept. My eldest son became worried and suggested I might be haunted by the rake from the famous creepypasta. I wasn't familiar with the story at the time, as I'd never paid much attention to creepypastas. But I took some time to watch a few versions explaining it. I wasn't impressed, and it didn't seem like a logical explanation for what I was experiencing. Only the claws and the suggestion of being watched resonated, but that wasn't enough. Meanwhile, the girls claimed they had another rough night. This time, it wasn't noise from upstairs. Instead, they said the lights in the basement kept turning on and off, and they heard scratching at their door, the one that leads outside to the woods at the edge of my property. We live on a mountain surrounded by woods, with a few acres of land. The idea of something scratching at the door wasn't entirely far-fetched. I've even had bears wander onto my land before, so while unsettling, it wasn't unheard of. Despite this, the girls continued having frightening experiences. After the third morning of finding handprints, I stopped actively involving myself with the odd events. The girls grew so frightened they moved upstairs and began sleeping on the other 2 sofas in the living room. Now, all 4 adults in the house, my buddy, the girls, and I, slept in the living room, while my sons stayed in their rooms. Even with the change, the strange occurrences didn't stop. The girls reported feeling watched in the bathroom. On several occasions, they said the shower curtain was pulled back while no one else was in the room. My sons both woke up one morning with what appeared to be cat scratches on their chests. They seemed superficial, but the boys were spooked. My cats tolerate nearly anything, except being used to dust tables. That's how I got them to scratch me for the original Charlie game, so the scratches didn't make sense. One night, all 4 of us heard scratching at the door, this time on the upstairs door, not the basement. As a combat veteran, I keep firearms in the house, so my buddy and I stepped outside to investigate. We searched the immediate area and kept hearing rustling noises. Following the sound, we made our way to the edge of the property, near the basement. We both noticed the basement light was on, but my buddy was the first to spot movement through the windows. A few of the basement windows were covered with weatherproof plastic to prevent air leaks, so we could only make out the shadow of a head moving back and forth. Whoever it was had no business being in my basement, especially at night. We approached the basement door, which was already open, and yelled inside that we were armed. We added that if they came forward now, they would be safely escorted off the property, but if they tried to jump out or hide, they could get injured. There was no response, no sound at all. Yet, all the lights were on, and the door had been wide open. The majority of my basement is open space, with just one finished room. That room didn't even have a proper door. The older girl had hung a blanket in its place. My buddy stood behind me as I moved the blanket aside to look inside. The moment I did, all the lights in the basement shut off with an audible snap. My buddy called out, "What is it?" and ran outside in a panic. I followed him. Once we were both outside, he admitted he had run because he thought he saw my head pushed past him in the dark and run out ahead of him. When he called out, he thought he was talking to me, even though I hadn't moved until after he left the basement. I closed the basement door and placed a block in front of it. When we returned upstairs, the girls described their experience. The power had gone out upstairs as well. When they went to check the breaker box, located in a broom closet upstairs, thanks to some weird 70s house design, the power came back on without any issue. Perhaps the basement power returned as well, though I'm unsure. After that incident, the girls moved out. They still keep in touch and visit but refuse to stay overnight because they're afraid of whatever I unleashed. They insist I lost something when I tried to make the deal. I've repeatedly pointed out that I received no such bounty as outlined in the offer I made. But they argue that I've still benefited. They pointed out that a couple of months after the Charlie game, the VA fixed their mistake about my status and began paying me again. They also noted that my writing had started gaining attention around the same time. I'd been making money and had garnered a modest following. Additionally, my buddy had sold his house, yes, he owned a house despite living with me, for a life-changing amount of money. He used the funds to travel for a while before returning to the area. Despite these supposed benefits, strange things have continued happening around the house. We've seen odd footprints in the snow and mud outside, on the patio and near the cars. We've heard noises in the basement and around the house. Once, we found the steps to the attic pulled down and left open for no apparent reason. I sometimes wake up with scratches on my head, arms, or legs. They're always superficial and don't leave scars, so I can't rule out my cats scratching me in my sleep, especially since I've trained them to scratch me for fun when I use them to dust things. The running joke is that Charlie needs to come out of his pockets if he's going to harass the household. While my life is on an upswing now, I certainly didn't receive what I expected from the offer I made. The girls believe I've let something loose that's essentially angry with me. They think my deal isn't weighted in its favor, leaving it stuck as a minor annoyance while I mock it for not giving me any loot. Personally, I stand by my 30-30 trade, it's a fair deal. If this entity wants to convince me otherwise, it'll need to make more than trivial claw prints to change my mind. Story number 5. When I was growing up in the 60s on Long Island, I adored my Aunt Elizabeth. She was my dad's baby sister, 12 years younger than him and 17 years older than me. She was a flight attendant for a major airline and lived in an apartment in the city. Aunt Elizabeth was the epitome of classic Italian beauty, petite, with olive skin, green eyes, and jet black hair. She doted on me, and I loved the pictures and gifts she'd bring from her travels. She doted on me, and I loved the pictures and gifts she'd bring me from other parts of the country, and sometimes even Europe. When I got older, my parents would let me visit her apartment. There, she and her equally gorgeous and glamorous friends would smoke cigarettes, drink cocktails, play records, and talk about sophisticated, adult things. I felt cool and mature just being in the room. One day, when she was 30, she called in sick to work, thinking she had the flu. It turned out to be meningitis, and she was dead within 2 days. What followed were some of the saddest events of my childhood. One of the 3 times I saw my father cry was as he dressed for her wake. They weren't soft tears, but big, racking sobs. I remember seeing Aunt Elizabeth laid out at the wake, wearing her flight attendant uniform, still beautiful. I remember how soft and lovely the cream-colored satin lining her casket felt. So many people came to her funeral that they spilled out onto the sidewalk next to the small suburban Catholic church. Sunday dinners with my grandparents, aunts, and uncles never felt the same afterward. Ironically, despite being the niece of a flight attendant from the golden age of air travel, I've always been terrified of flying. I used to travel frequently for work, and on long-haul flights, I often couldn't cope without the help of a whole bottle of red wine and Ambien. A few months ago, I decided to stop that habit. It wasn't healthy. So, on my first cross-country flight in a while, I took 10 milligrams of melatonin, sat in my seat anxiously, and tried to fall asleep. Eventually, I did. What followed were terrifying dreams. Naturally, they took place on the same flight. Of course, the cabin pressure dropped, the plane began plummeting, and I was about to crash into a cornfield. Everyone around me panicked and screamed. Then, I saw a flight attendant walking down the aisle toward me. It was my Aunt Elizabeth. She walked calmly and intently, with a sly smile on her face, as if I were an old friend she hadn't seen in a long time. She was wearing the same flight attendant uniform she'd been buried in, but her legs and feet were bare. She came to my seat, looked at me, took my left hand in hers, and said, "It'll be okay, honey. It really will. Things can look bad, and sometimes it gets a little turbulent, but the pilot will right it." Then she added, "How are you?" I sputtered out the first things that came to mind. I talked about where I went to school, my first job, and how much she would have loved cell phones. I mentioned that my dad had passed, but my mom and sister were doing fine. I babbled about how ridiculous rents were in the city and how much our hometown had changed. As I spoke, I noticed the plane returning to normal, the pressure stabilizing, the people calming down. The dream ended shortly before everything felt completely normal again. I woke up 30 minutes before landing, stunned by the dream. I hadn't thought about Aunt Elizabeth in years, much less in such vivid detail. I had a few minutes before landing, so I called my mother and told her about the dream. I mentioned that it seemed strange Aunt Elizabeth was barefoot while working on the plane. My mother paused and said, "Elizabeth was buried barefoot." She explained it was a custom in the little corner of Sicily where my father's family comes from. Women are traditionally buried barefoot, and they adhered to this tradition for both Aunt Elizabeth and my grandmother. I hadn't known this because the lower lid of Aunt Elizabeth's casket had been closed during the wake. I'm not religious, but that detail made me truly believe Aunt Elizabeth came to visit me. Whether it was her or a part of her, I felt she had comforted me during a time of stress and fear. It was wonderful and moving to realize this. It felt like a warm blanket wrapping around me. I suddenly recalled memories of my aunt I didn't even know I had. I cried in an airport bathroom, overwhelmed by the love and connection I'd felt in the dream. I've been through a lot in my life: moves, unemployment, 2 divorces, losing a house and getting one back, and losing friends and family. But for a few moments in a dream, I got to see someone who I loved and who loved me, back when I was a little girl excited about the big world ahead of her. I love you, Aunt Elizabeth. Visit again anytime. Story number 6. About 10 years ago, my family and I brought back some small vases that we were told were 400 years old from Machu Picchu. The vases were made of mud and had faces carved on them. They were given to us by a family friend who said he wanted to give us something special for visiting Peru. He claimed he bought them from a local in the Pisco region of Peru, where Machu Picchu is. We brought the vases home to Canada, and almost immediately, a horrible streak of bad luck and accidents began to affect our family. My mom developed cataracts at a very young age, my father lost both his jobs, my brother and I were constantly sick, and my little sister would start screaming randomly. On the verge of being homeless, we began looking for things to sell and came across the vases. We didn't know if we could sell them or how much they were worth, so to get an idea, we called one of my dad's friends in Peru who had worked in a museum. After some back and forth, he told my dad that these types of items are not meant to leave their home soil and are not worth much, maybe a few bucks. He also mentioned that such items are often cursed. To lift the curse, he said, we needed to prick our fingers, smear a little blood on each vase, and send them back. Of course, we were skeptical. We thought the man might be trying to trick us into returning the vases so he could sell them himself. A blood sacrifice? That sounded ridiculous. Fast forward 2 days, my parents got into a pretty nasty car accident. Thankfully, we were all okay, but my mom and dad had to take a few weeks off work to recover. After that, they decided it might be worth trying the blood ritual and sending the vases back. We did as instructed, pricking our fingers, smearing a little blood on the vases, and sending them back to Peru. The very next week, things started to improve noticeably. My dad found a great job, and so did my mom. We also found a new place to live with very low rent, and everyone's health improved significantly. What do you think? Was it a coincidence, or were the vases truly cursed? Story number 7. My boys are currently 8 and 6, but this happened when they were 4 and 2. We had been living in our new place for about 5 or 6 months. My oldest, who wasn't particularly verbal at the time, kept walking to a corner of the room, looking up, and talking. He was still doing a lot of babbling until he was nearly 6. One day, after a few times of this behavior, he walked over, grabbed his younger brother's hand, led him to the corner, and they both looked up and started talking. They were smiling and giggling, almost like an adult was interacting with them. Then my youngest tripped over, and I asked, "What in the world are you two doing?" thinking it was some kind of game. My oldest diddled and said, "I'm talking to Grandpa." Confused, I replied, "Grandpa lives in Nebraska. He's very far away." My child looked at me and said, "No, Mommy. It's your grandpa." This completely unnerved me. My oldest was still babbling most of the time, so for him to suddenly speak so clearly and coherently was startling. I glanced at the corner where they were both talking and showing their toys, as though someone was there. I watched for a few minutes, unsure what to make of it. Eventually, I called them over, saying, "Come watch your movie so Mom can finish dinner." My younger one waddled over and sat down, while my oldest picked up the toys in the corner, put them away, and then sat next to his brother. As I made dinner, I kept glancing at the corner. On a whim, I said softly, "Thanks, Grandpa." Almost immediately, the door in that corner fell open, like someone had walked through it. Afterward, there was a heightened feeling in the room, like the energy had shifted. That night, I had a dream about my childhood home. In the dream, I walked along the path leading to the woods and saw a small structure. It looked like a granite mausoleum but was more like an awning with one wall, 4 pillars, and a bench swing. I walked up to it, lit some incense, and sat on the swing, staring at the ground. Then I saw them, those old, ratty sneakers. My grandpa was sitting next to me, smiling. He sat on the swing, and I started talking to him. I mostly talked about my boys and told him how much I missed him. I named my oldest after my grandfather. During the dream, he just sat and listened with that familiar smile on his face. After a while, we both stood up. I hugged him and told him I hadn't even begun to tell him everything yet. Then, I heard my name called from somewhere. I looked around but didn't see anyone. When I turned back, he was gone. I yanked the door open, and it revealed a vertical shaft, endless in both directions and completely lined with doors. I woke up crying, in the middle of a panic attack. Story number 8. My grandfather passed away in 2005, my grandmother in 2008, and my son was born in 2010, just 1 week shy of my grandfather's birthday. Coincidentally, that had been the original date the doctor scheduled for me to be induced. When my sister was quite young, our grandmother bought her a porcelain doll. The doll wasn't anything special, it wasn't an antique or valuable. It was just the kind of doll you'd buy in a novelty shop. It was delicate and couldn't be moved without the risk of breaking it. She had the doll for a few years before my parents divorced. After the divorce, we moved in with our mother to a poor neighborhood in Alton, Illinois. The house felt strange. It also had a peculiar smell. My sister put the doll in one of the built-in cabinets in the wall, and that's where it stayed for the first few days. At first, we started noticing small changes. The doll's position or orientation would be slightly different than before. For instance, she would be on the shelf facing the living room, but when we left and came back, she'd be rotated in a different direction. We initially thought, Mom's probably messing with us. We tried to ignore it, but it kept happening. After a few months, the doll began showing up in different parts of the house. She might be on the cabinet one moment and on the dining room table the next. Sometimes, she'd be by the couch or even on the floor facing the television. We had made a lot of new friends in the neighborhood, and when they came over, I would show them what the doll would do. Without fail, I'd place her somewhere, we'd leave the room for a few minutes, and when we returned, she'd be in a different spot. We still thought it might be my mom messing with us, but the issue was that Mom worked a lot during that time. Additionally, my sister and I skipped school plenty of days to stay home, and the movement still happened when no one else was home. It couldn't have been her. One day, we decided to mess around with an old Ouija board I had in my closet. I don't remember if we bought it or if it was just there. The messages we received identified a spirit named Candy Zimmerman. Candy didn't say much, but through the board, she claimed to have a crush on me. One day, I skipped school again while my sister went. I walked her down to the bus stop, waited until I saw her get on the bus, and then headed back home. My mom was already at work. Since I was still tired, I decided to go back to bed. The next thing that happened, I'll never forget. I heard a knock at my bedroom door. It startled me awake, but I ignored it and laid my head back down. A few minutes later, there was another knock, this one much louder and in a rhythm. I still remember it to this day. It sounded like the rhythm of shave and a haircut, but slightly different. At this point, I was freaked out. I lay there with my eyes wide open, listening. My bedroom door was heavy and always stuck in warmer weather, which it was that day. Then, the door suddenly popped open, just enough for me to see into the hallway, but not enough to see over the edge of my bed. I sat up and looked toward the floor. There, standing at the entrance to my room, was that doll. She was on her stand, staring at me. Before the fear set in, I was actually pissed off. Did my sister come back? Was she messing with me? I got up, grabbed the doll by the hair, and carried her into the living room. But no one was there. I checked the front door, it was locked. I barged into my sister's room, no one was there. I barged into my mom's room, no one was home. At this point, I was freaking out. I took the doll to my sister's room, threw her in the closet, buried her under a stack of bags filled with old clothes and boxes of junk, and shut the door. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the front porch, waiting for Mom to come home. The strange incidents with the doll never happened again, and I made sure to have a friend, a local Wiccan, bind the Ouija board, which my sister kept. We moved out of the house a year later, though we experienced a few more paranormal incidents before leaving. As for the doll, after we moved back in with my father, she ended up in my bedroom closet for about 5 years. One day, while cleaning it out, we threw her away. Was the doll haunted? I don't know. It could have just been something about that house or whatever was moving things around. Story number 9. When I was 10 or 11 years old, I was sleeping in my grandma's guest bedroom. Next to the bed was an antique easy chair. When I woke up the next morning, I looked over at the chair and saw a little girl sitting there. She had dark hair tied in pigtails with blue ribbons and wore an old-fashioned dress from the early 1900s. At first, I was startled to see her, but I was even more startled when I realized I could see through her. She looked at me, smiled, waved, and mouthed the words, "Hello." I said hello back, and she slowly faded away. That was my first experience with a ghost. Months later, on Easter Sunday, my sister and I were staying the night at my grandma's house so we could receive our Easter baskets and hunt for eggs. I woke up early, eager to peek at the baskets. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and walked to the living room. The early morning sunlight was streaming brightly through the windows. Sitting on the couch was the same little girl. I smiled and waved, and she smiled and waved back. I told her it was great to see her again, and she emphatically nodded as if to say it was good to see me too. My grandma must have heard me talking because she woke up and told me to go back to bed. It was still too early to hunt for eggs. I looked back at the couch, but the little girl was gone. That was the last time I saw her. Shortly after, my grandma moved to a new place. However, my friend Melissa later moved into my grandma's old house. She claimed to have seen the little girl with the blue ribbons in her hair too. During that same period, my mom, sister, and I were living in a trailer on my great-uncle Wilbur's cattle ranch. We stayed there while my dad was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. On the property, Uncle Wilbur had built a two-story building in the mid-'80s that everyone called the Tower. The top floor of the tower had windows facing in every direction, with the largest one overlooking Highway 99. Uncle Wilbur believed you could learn a lot by observing the highway. In the evenings, he would often go to the top of the tower to watch TV and keep an eye on the cattle. The lower portion of the tower was used by my family to store clothes and food. One night, Mom instructed my sister and me to go to the bottom of the tower to pick out breakfast for the next morning. Tricia was busy with something, so I offered to grab breakfast for her. I entered the bottom floor of the tower and grabbed a handful of Pop-Tarts. Above me, I could hear the TV, so I assumed Uncle Wilbur was up in the tower. I stepped out of the bottom half of the tower and looked up toward the large window to see if Wilbur was there. The TV was on, but Wilbur wasn't in the tower. Instead, there was a family, a mother, father, little girl, and boy. I thought it was strange that they were up there, as Wilbur hardly ever had visitors. Another odd thing was that they weren't watching TV. Instead, they were sitting on the couch, staring out the window toward Highway 99. They didn't move. They sat with perfect posture, their hands resting on their laps. Even though I thought it was unusual, I returned to the trailer and didn't mention it to my mom. The next day, I asked Uncle Wilbur who his guests were. He looked at me with a confused expression and said he hadn't had any guests last night. No one had been there. Who were those people? A few months later, I went down to the bottom of the tower again to grab breakfast for the next morning. I grabbed some oatmeal and, as I was closing the door behind me, I looked up at the landing that led to the door on the top floor. Standing on the landing was a woman in a white, flowing dress. Her skin was as pale as her dress, and her hair and gown seemed to move in a wind that didn't exist. She looked down at me, smiled, and did a slow, graceful wave. Despite the friendly gesture, I was terrified. She reminded me of depictions of banshees I'd seen in movies. I ran back to the trailer and told my mom what I had seen. She immediately exited the trailer and went up the stairs to the top of the tower. She opened the door, but no one was there. We knew the woman couldn't have come down the stairs because the windows on the trailer faced the stairway, and we didn't see anyone descend. Most of our family friends know the tower is haunted. I believe it sits on some kind of vortex. Though my family no longer lives on the property, I still see spirits from time to time. I call them my visitors. I don't try to communicate with them, nor do they with me. They just appear, and as quickly as they come, they vanish. Years later, I was attending my sister's graduation in Binghamton, New York. My family rented a well-priced B&B for 2 nights, the only one available with 5 bedrooms because of our extended Chinese family. The house was a Victorian-era property, fully decked out in Victorian American aesthetics, ornate floral wallpaper, trinkets, paintings of serious-looking children, and lots of dolls. No one in my family wanted the room with the creepy dolls. I'm not superstitious, and since I hadn't seen the room yet, I didn't understand the gravity of the situation. I volunteered and said, "Sure, I'll take the room with the dolls." You see where this is going. As midnight approached, I got tired, even after a tiny bite of baklava and an espresso. I was the first to head to bed. When I entered the room, I saw the dolls. They were locked inside a glass case, all facing the bed. Don't be silly, I thought. You're a brave trans girl. They're probably more afraid of you than you are of them because you're something they've likely never encountered before. Silly thoughts. I decided to take out my black, ebony-handled opal pocket knife and placed it on the nightstand for protection. I watched YouTube for a while, then turned off the lamp and slipped under the covers. I felt the doll staring at me, but my rational side told me it was all in my head. By 3 a.m., I was half-conscious, slipping in and out of sleep. While in this dreamlike state, I was still aware of everything around me. The dolls were staring. Were they next to me? I was too afraid to open my eyes. I blinked and thought, it's okay. I have protection. I didn't dare look at the ebony-handled knife on the nightstand. I was afraid I'd see a doll next to me. Then I remembered a grim statistic: armed victims of assault often have their weapons taken away and used against them. My gosh, I thought, I'm going to get stabbed. That's when I heard it, a vivid, playful, childlike voice saying, "It would be my heart's desire." Immediately, I became alert, like R2-D2 rebooting after being in low-power mode. Adrenaline rushed through me. My awareness went from 0 to 60 in a split second. I could hear a ringing in my ears as I lay there, paralyzed with fear. I stayed like that, hyper-aware and motionless, until the sun started to rise around 5 a.m. Finally, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep. When I woke up later that morning, I dreaded the thought of sleeping there again for yet another night. The next night, I decided to take a different approach. You know what? Violence begets violence, I thought. I placed my pocket knife in my bag instead of on the nightstand and went to bed. To my relief, I fell asleep peacefully and slept through the night. Story number 10. When I was maybe 9 or 10, my mom worked a graveyard shift at the hospital. My sister and I would usually be asleep by the time she left. My sister, who was 5 at the time, and I were playing in the living room one evening. We had a huge TV in there and 2 remotes because we had the same type of TV in my older sister's room. The remote for the living room TV was on the couch, but since both remotes could control either TV, they were interchangeable. As we played, the TV suddenly switched on. It made some weird noises, and then the 10 o'clock news started playing as normal. My sister and I were scared out of our minds because neither of us had touched the remotes. Our cats were in another room, and we both ran into my older sister's room to check on her. She was asleep, and her remote was on the dresser across the room from her bed. I woke her up, and she comforted us. In retrospect, it wasn't that scary, but as a little kid, it took me forever to fall asleep that night. I've always felt like my house was haunted. As a kid, I had this weird habit: whenever I left my room, I would poke my head out and check both ends of the hallway, like someone checking for cars in an alley. I'd look into the dark void of the dining room and see nothing. But one time, when I turned toward the kitchen, I swear I saw a red-tinted figure just standing there, doing nothing. The bathroom was across the hall, and I really needed to go, but I started crying out of fear. I turned back into my room, flipped the light on, and hid under my covers. I never saw that red figure again, so I like to pretend it was just my imagination. But even now, when I think about it, I still wonder if it was real or if I'm just crazy. I've had several strange experiences at my dad's house. There was a handprint on the wall, like someone with dirty hands had touched it. It was a really big hand, nothing extreme, just larger than average. Every time we wiped it off, it would reappear the next day. Whatever was in my dad's house also seemed to target his girlfriend. Almost every time she was alone, she'd hear noises like doors opening or faint whispering from other rooms. I heard the whispering too. It was loud enough to hear, but not loud enough to understand what was being said. There was one time when my dad's girlfriend was showering and felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned around, but no one was there. Then she remembered she was home alone. Another time, while she was cooking, a can of beans was thrown out of the cabinet and hit her on the head. My dad also reported seeing people around his bed at night. I've seen a little girl in old-fashioned clothes out of the corner of my eye several times while I was there. My dad and his girlfriend eventually tried to control the activity by burning incense and sage, using rituals prescribed for this purpose. It became a strange kind of normal for us. This story comes from my parents, who bought a house and were fixing it up. The previous owners were an elderly couple with a grandson living with them. One day, the grandson died either by getting hit by a car outside or from the flu. I can't remember which. While working on the house, my mom was painting and left the brush in a specific spot. When she came back later, she found it in a completely different place. My aunt and uncle also helped with renovations. One day, my aunt was there alone and about to leave when she heard the water upstairs turn on by itself. She went up to turn it off and came back downstairs, only for the water to turn on again. She freaked out and left. Finally, my uncle had a strange experience while preparing to leave the house. The light switch on a chain at the top of the stairs began to dangle and sway on its own. He left quickly after that,